Story 1. Elagabalus. Chapter 6. I had managed to find the dark place described in the journals. It was apparent that I was not looking hard enough during my first few perusals of Catherine's entries, because all the clues were there. My greatest mistake was in assuming that the only important sections were those pertaining to her diabolical club. I made a point to shy away from entries that were personal in some kind of late respect for the deceased girl. In doing so, I missed some of the more important details leading to her death, in particular the location of the studio. On August 14th, Catherine described a penultimate meeting with her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend, Brian. It was a pleasant day by the James River, but despite this, Catherine had felt a great amount of discomfort with the meeting. It had been a few months since the two had been separated by a summer intercession. Catherine had returned to her family home in Southern Virginia, whereas Brian remained on campus. Though Catherine tried to continue communication with the man that she loved, she found it more and more difficult to keep his attention as the weeks wore on. Eventually the two drifted apart. Even when she returned, she felt immense difficulty in re-establishing communication with the boy she had once felt so free and open with. As Catherine waited on a park bench overlooking the rambling rapids of the James, she could feel a heavy, sinking discomfort in her stomach. She did not know what would become of this meeting. She did not know whether the boy felt the same way about her as he did before, or even if she still felt that way. As the minutes wore on, and he finally appeared, she could tell that everything had changed. He was not the same Brian. Although he spoke warmly to her, she could tell his mind was adrift somewhere else. Even so, she decided to stick with him through the rest of the evening, under the presumption that trying was the least she could do considering all they had been through together. The night wore on, and though the evening was pleasant, a spark had been gone between the two. Both were very aware of this as they walked back to the place where her bike was chained near the old Civil War exhibit by the river. She fumbled the lock of her bike, her mind reeling over the thought that their once electric relationship would end without a word. Aside from the possible wave goodbye as she rode her bicycle out into the night, she thought that Brian felt this as well, which is how she rationalized his next eccentric actions. He begged her to spend some more time with him, coaxed her to follow him to some dark place by the riverside, and convinced her that he had something to show her. Though Brian had been acting strangely the entire day, Catherine still hoped that there was some way they could remedy the situation and go back to the brilliant winter and spring they had shared together. She followed him to a dark place beneath a footbridge. She had been here numerous times with her friends when they had ventured to the small island situated in the middle of the James. Although she had been here often, she was surprised when Brian pushed aside some corrugated metal, revealing a dark, yawning tunnel leading downward. Brian looked at her desperately and petitioned that they both explore the creepy, forgotten place together, implying that it was something they would have done before. Catherine took one look at the tunnel and, seeing only darkness, decided she would have none of it. She left him there then, riding up to the city above while he descended alone into the tunnel. The two would officially break up a few days later through a slew of vicious text messages, and Catherine would push the memory of the evening off as much as she could. That would be until a few weeks later, when Catherine and her friends were spending a day by the river in a bid to make the most of the now dwindling summer heat. This day had been going much smoother for the girl, but she had been trying desperately to close the wounds she had felt from her breakup. She had been trying her best to show her friends she was happy. She laughed at all of their jokes and even tried flirting with some of the boys at the suggestion of Tricia. This seemed to work as she was beginning to convince herself that she was getting over it all. These attempts were all but ruined when she noticed a figure moving just in the distance. She could tell that the figure, even if it were just a silhouette, had been Brian. Her stomach lurched. He did not seem to notice her, which only proved to sharpen the blow, but continued his path to the place where they had departed some time before, disappearing behind a sheet of corrugated metal. This vision haunted her, and she would spend the rest of the outing and the hours that followed replaying the image in her head. She could not stop herself from thinking about it. The sight of Brian descending down that dark tunnel had struck something in her. It was like some long gray finger had reached out from the blackest part of her subconscious and scratched that part of her mind that craved the mysterious. It would scratch until she had found answers to some of her most pertinent questions. What had really happened to Brian, and by extension the pumpkin patch, while she was gone? Why had Brian insisted they meet by the river for their last meeting? What was Brian dying to show her that night? Ultimately, this line of thought would poke and prod Catherine Mason down the path that led to her death. The day I decided to investigate the area by the river, the weather had been quite unpleasant. The sky was gray from clouds, and although a greater storm had been threatening, there was little but the occasional drizzle. To the south and below me roared the white-capped rapids of the James, now reeling from the encroaching storm. Just beyond their cacophony stretched the lonesome island the locals called Belle Ilse, a name that I couldn't help but notice shared some similarities to the diabolical Belial. I trained my gaze along the footbridge where it stretched from the lonely island to my side of the water. Above it, the noisy overpass of US 301 loomed. At the end of the footbridge was a stairway leading down to my level of the street. Behind me, Tricia was leaning on the side of her red Honda Accord lighting a cigarette. She had driven me here and was now determined to wait it out until I returned from my mission. I told her there was nothing to worry about. It was broad daylight, and I felt like there was no chance of danger. Even if this place had once been the location of the pumpkin patch's base of operations, the studio, it would be unlikely that they remained here after the murders. Regardless, Tricia remained stubborn. According to her, any friends she knew that entered that place either died or disappeared. She did not want to lose the only other person who was still looking into the murder of her friend Catherine. Eventually I caved, but I reiterated to her that if I did not return in an hour or two, she should go directly to the police and not come in after me. She begrudgingly agreed. The entrance was actually a lot trickier to find than we had assumed. It took a good 15 minutes to find, although it would have been longer if it weren't for the help of the lovely Tricia. Once we discovered the place, Tricia and I exchanged one last apprehensive look. There was no telling what I would find down there, and although I was sure the place would be abandoned, and there was still a sense of dangerous foreboding in the air, after a brief pause to prepare myself, I fired up my flashlight and began my descent down the long dark corridor before me. During my time at college, I studied all sorts of literature. Most of my favorite stories were myths and folklore that families historically recited to each other by dancing firelight. These stories were often similar to each other in many areas. The tales would include some great hero, a monster, and some impossible journey to vanquish evil and return to normal life. One of my favorite stories spoke of a goddess who descended into the underworld to meet with her once forgotten sister, the keeper of the underworld. Often this story was stated to have metaphorical meaning. It was said that the underworld was truly an analogy for the goddess's own subconscious, and that she had to travel into this underworld to discover some kind of long-forgotten, long-suppressed part of herself. Her hero's journey was only accomplished once she had communed with this part of herself and brought it to the light. She had to journey into the realm of death and return changed. I thought of this story as I began to maneuver through the expansive tunnel system of the city. I wondered how many other cities had tunnels like these, long-forgotten passages that stretched miles beneath their respective cityscapes, containing crimes and secrets long since shunned by the people who lived above, like some deep, primal subconsciousness lurking at the heart of every metropolis, rarely seen or spoken of, but always present and felt. It seemed to me, as I waded through the dark passageway about me, ankle-deep in sludge, that there was something fermenting in this place. Something was festering down here in the darkness beneath the city, amassing itself and gaining strength before its inevitable return. Perhaps the murder of Catherine Mason had ignited that return. In the dead girl's journal, she had referenced a series of glow in the dark markers which traced her way through the tunnels. At my first large intersection, I followed the dead girl's path and trained my flashlight to the top right corner of the passageways. I only had to hold my light on the spot for a few short minutes before turning my flashlight completely off. I was both relieved and anxious when, after doing so, a symbol appeared ghostly green over the leftmost passage. According to my later research, this symbol was the alchemical rune for phosphorus. I continued this process at a couple of other intersections. At one place was the zodiac symbol for the Scorpio, while another was decorated unceremoniously with an upside-down pentagram. My favorite had to be the enigmatic 666 scrawled out in wispy green script over a particularly fungus-covered passageway. There was only one time that I felt particularly scared within that system of tunnels. I will not lie. The whole situation was suitably creepy. I found myself fighting to press onward into the unknown place. Often I could hear the scratching of insects around me and the rhythmic drips of water from above. At one intersection, with my flashlight off, I could hear the distinct sound of something large crashing into the water just ahead of me. I quickly jumped to shine my flashlight in the direction of the sound. I probably scared the thing in the process, as all that could be seen was some furry, distinctly four-legged creature retreating into the darkness away from me. Eventually I had reached my destination just beyond an intersection marked by a glowing devil emoticon. While most of the tunnels had been cement constructs, the last bit just past this intersection had been carefully fashioned from stone bricks. The passage continued around a bend before it opened up to a raised area just past an arch portal way of masonry. At the top right corner of this arch was a sneering glow-in-the-dark tack-o'-lantern. The room itself was fairly large and musty smelling. There was still a rather waterlogged roach-infested couch sitting on the leftmost wall of the room. This was described in the journals. A generator was also there in the rightmost corner, just by the entrance. I checked to see if the thing had any gas, but unfortunately, it was empty. All in all, the place looked abandoned. Although that was what I expected, I still felt the slight jab of disappointment. There were a couple of easels propped up in random positions around the room, with one laying awkwardly on the ground, looking like some kind of dead thing. The walls were painted very darkly with splotches and patches left bare here and there. For a second I thought that the walls were just lazily covered, like the painting was done by some 3-year-old with a crayon who was used to scribbling in a coloring book. As I got closer, I realized that this effect existed because the walls were covered by a script of close-together, overlapping words and sentences. This was also described in the girl's journal, but she never properly described their effect. Perhaps she was unfazed by the design choice because she had a friend with her, or else because she was once a member of the group herself and did not fear them. As I was alone during my visit, I couldn't help but feel the wicked lunacy evoked from painting a wall in this manner. Out of the whole incomprehensible mass, there was only one spot of wall that was left completely bare. It was on the wall straight back from the entranceway, just past the 4 stone columns in the center of the hold. Here, all of the wall scribbles stop to form a single rectangle of empty space. I cannot explain why this spot unsettled me so, but to me it was the most unsightly aspect of all I had seen in the studio. Perhaps it was the strangeness of it. In a room where every wall was covered by the noisy scroll of threatening and damning messages, there was only one part left completely bare, pristine and blank. The rectangle was about 26 by 28 inches, the correct size for a large painting. Just beneath it was situated a small golden plaque, about 4 inches long, that was screwed into the wall. The plaque had only one letter engraved on it, and the letter was E. When I emerged from the bowels of the city, I had found that the weather had cleared up considerably. It was about noon, and, to my luck, Tricia was still waiting there by her car. Together we drove back toward the college campus and found a small coffee shop where I explained to her what I had found. She did not seem all that surprised that the place was empty. She assumed that place might have been abandoned when the group went way underground a few months prior. She also had some insight into the identity of the enigmatic painting. "It's Elagabalus," she said, her green eyes flashing excitedly. I had shown her the journals before, when we first met and this whole journey started. Even then, this word Elagabalus had been of great interest to her. For a while she seemed obsessed by it. It was only mentioned once in the journals, however, and until now I wasn't so sure of its importance. "You think that the painting is called Elagabalus?" I asked her quizzically. "Well, why not?" she challenged with a confident smirk. It took me a moment to take in her response. In the entry where Elagabalus was mentioned, it seemed to me that the name referred to a person. As we looked at the journal again in the coffee shop, I was not so sure. This assertion that Elagabalus was in fact a painting raised more questions for me. Where did it come from? Why did the group hold it in such high regard? We decided to journey to the public library in order to research the location of a new pumpkin patch den and learn more about the Elagabalus painting. I got busy trying to find whatever I could on the name in question. Trish, the local set off in search for the next likely place for a murderous art cult to be hiding. While I spent most of my time on the public computer's search engine, Tricia spent her hours in the archives reviewing old city surveys and maps. When we reconvened in a few hours, Tricia had amassed an impressive list of possible studio locations that put my few articles of Elagabalus to shame. "Okay, so where should we start?" she asked enthusiastically, with an armful of books and notes. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" I teased. To this she only shook her head. We decided that I would go first. I had the least information to present, and we were afraid that the discussion of Tricia's findings would get lengthy and get us sidetracked. There were only a few hits on the subject of Elagabalus. The first referred to a Roman emperor, also known as Heliogabalus. Apparently, he had been a rather controversial figure during his reign from 218 to 222. His reign began when he was declared an illegitimate heir to the empire and fought a rebellion for the throne. He had also overthrown the religious order in Rome, installing his own deity in place of the customary Jupiter. This deity had the extravagant name of Deus Sol Invictus, or God, the undefeated sun. A second controversy was started when the emperor was found to have been sleeping with his chariot driver. The reign ended with an assassination, and much of Elagabalus' rule was apparently stricken from the public record. Perhaps the painting was of this controversial figure. If the painting was of a person, then it would make sense why I would confuse the painting for a who instead of a what. The only issue is that the figure in question seemed quite random. The only thing that had stood out to me was Deus Sol Invictus, but I had yet to see any reference to this in Pumpkin Patch's archived works, and I had not seen any other themes of the emperor's life aside from the use of his name. It was a mystery to determine why this particular figure was so important to the group. The only other article was a strange one regarding an occultist named Eliphas Levi. According to Levi, in his book Dogma et Ritual de la Magi, what a mouthful, Elagabalus refers to a stone which was worshipped for its properties. Apparently the stone would prolong life and serve as the font of all wisdoms. This metaphysical stone also served as the basis from which all magic could be built upon, and was at the cornerstone of human subconscious, and conscious of being Elagabalus for Levi was nothing less than the famed philosopher's stone, and its power could be found within the human mind. While it seemed to me a stretch, this definition of Elagabalus seemed to be the closest fit to explaining the painting. The group certainly held it in high standing, as though it were the mythical philosopher's stone. Tricia agreed that this explanation, though imperfect, seemed like the best fit. Next, we turned over to the locations for the Pumpkin Patch's new studio. The locations in question all catered to the eerier side of the city's history. Among the locations were an old Civil War prison on Belle Isle, the magnificent Hollywood Cemetery, and several locations closed to the Poe Museum, a place where the Pumpkin Patch was once showcased in the earlier, non-murderous days. I asked about Lumpkin's slave jail, and Tricia pointed out to me that it was under a parking lot, and there was no physical place for a killer cult to hide. Eventually, we decided that the old train tunnel beneath Church Hill was the likeliest place for the group to be hiding. The tunnel was subject to catastrophic collapse in the 1920s, resulting in the death of 4 people, and it has been the subject of urban legend ever since. According to one story, a first responder to the disaster arrived at the scene only to discover a strange, deformed humanoid being crouched over a victim of the crash. This creature reportedly fled the scene and set up shop in Hollywood Cemetery, which is one explanation for the Richmond vampire. Anyways, we decided to leave immediately to investigate the place. By the time we arrived at the place, it was dusk. Not wanting to attract attention, Tricia suggested we park the car and walk to the tunnel entrance. I asked her how we would enter the place, and she said she used to do it all the time. There was a hole in the fence, and the lock on the gate was often replaced because of trespassers. She was right, of course. The chain-link fence, which warded the area, was compromised. It was fixed haphazardly with zip ties and blue wire. The gate itself was held shut by a simple combination lock. Tricia informed me that this entrance was supposed to be for service and maintenance. The actual tunnel opening was apparently sealed sometime after the collapse by cement. We were able to break open the lock and enter the maintenance tunnel with our flashlights at the ready. It's funny, I said I thought the gates of hell were supposed to say something like "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." Tricia did not think my joke was funny and chose to ignore it. What followed seemed to occur in a dreamlike trance. We passed through the gate and were soon descending down a winding passageway into the dark tunnel. Aside from our echoing footsteps, we could hear the unnerving chatter of rats, which scurried away from us somewhere just outside the reach of our flashlights. As I moved through the tunnel, I became painfully aware of this feeling that I was being watched. I tried to push this anxiety aside and was assured by the sound of Tricia's footsteps behind me. That was until I turned around and discovered she was not there. I must have been halfway down the access tunnel by that time. I tried calling her name, but got no response. Actually, I was quite sure at one point that I heard a muffled giggle in response, but perhaps that's just a detail I added after the fact. Looking back now, I do not know what overtook me as I decided to move further into the tunnel proper. The place was not as large as I thought it would be. I followed the ruined trackway down to the center of the tunnel, altogether to aware that someone or something was watching me. Eventually I could make out the flicker of candlelight in the distance, and I suppose I was drawn to the light like a moth to a flame. What was once a small flicker soon became a roaring flame as I trudged down the cramped stone tunnel. There, at the end of my journey, was a circle of red, glowing candles with a lone easel at their center. Upon this easel sat a covered painting. I was so transfixed by the scene that it took me a few minutes to process that there were others in the chamber with me. Just at the outer edge of the glowing candle light, there moved figures and shapes of masked individuals who seemed to be assessing my every move. Among the masked faces I could see a rabbit, a clown, a skull, an assortment of hand-carved, tribal-looking masks, and the shriveled husk of a face which I knew belonged to someone called Hungry Preta. I was eventually approached by one of the figures, undoubtedly female, who wore a handmade crow mask. She seemed to be far too familiar with me as she stroked my arm indulgently, leading me closer to the painting at the center of the space before stopping to press herself close behind me. She nestled her chin upon my shoulder and stretched her arms caressingly across my chest in a gentle but inescapable embrace from behind. I was not altogether unnerved by this experience. I had gone numb to the fact that any of it was really occurring. Had I really wandered into this dark and diabolical den? Had I really lost Tricia in the passageway? Had I so foolishly wandered into my own death as Catherine had? Was this the end? I would soon discover that it was not the end, but rather some type of beginning, as the other figures slowly removed the covering of the painting, and my captor began to lovingly stroke my hair. There before me was the face of the thing I recently learned had been called Elagabalus, and as I stood there dumbstruck, taking in the thing, I thought it was magnificent. Story 2. Los Perdidos. The broken blade flashed as it streaked above the desert, circling end over end, then striking the rocky ground with a clink. It lay there gleaming in the slanted rays of the sun like lost treasure. The other half of the blade remained lodged firmly between spiky ranks of spines in the barrel cactus, only an inch of the cleanly snapped edge protruding. Alex would have cried in despair and fury if he'd had any tears left, but they were long gone. His eyes as dry as the sand he saw he knelt on. His head pounded and his muscles cramped anew, aggravated by the effort required to fling the knife away in disgust. It was late afternoon on Sunday. He'd run out of water 24 hours ago, every cell in his body aching for replenishment. Though his meager supply of food was a distant memory, driving thirst had long since made him forget the hunger pangs. A long-forgotten scene had pushed to the forefront of his brain someone in a nameless movie, a Western, cutting into a barrel cactus and drinking the life-saving reservoir of fluid inside it. Hope had briefly seized him, but that hope shattered along with his cheap pocket knife. His swollen tongue clumsily maneuvered a small, smooth pebble around his mouth in an attempt to generate moisture, but it was akin to coaxing water from a bag of cotton balls. Friday morning had been the start of a well-deserved four-day weekend. It was early May and warm, but still weeks away from the brutal heat of true summer. On a whim, Alex stuffed his sketch pad and pencils, a granola bar, an apple, and a liter bottle of water into his backpack, threw the lot into his pickup truck, and hit the road. He'd wanted to take a day trip west of Tucson since he and Jenna had moved there 9 months ago, but day-to-day life kept intervening. Envisioning a peaceful morning of hiking and sketching the desert landscape, he sought the most uninhabited and undeveloped area possible. Leaving the city far behind, he drove still further, signs of civilization vanishing bit by bit, and was delighted to finally discover an unmarked dirt road well off the beaten path. Without hesitation, he turned onto it and bumped along its twists and turns for uncounted miles and minutes until the road became little more than a trail, small desert shrubs and grasses whipping the sides of his truck as he drove, carefully coaxing the reluctant truck up a small hill, steering through an obstacle course of large rocks and gaping crevices. He navigated a particularly primitive stretch. The reward at the top of the rise was a stunning view of unbroken miles of Sonoran desert, its rocky ground green to spring and surmounted by an impossibly blue sky that wouldn't know clouds until the monsoon season started in July. With the engine idling and both windows rolled down, he paused to take in the view, crunching the apple. Dry desert grasses waved gently in the warm breeze, and a profusion of spring-green leaves sprouted from a nearby ocotillo. A noisy dispute between the cactus wrens caught his attention and so absorbed was he in his surroundings that he didn't at first notice the small flames licking the right side of the truck's hood. By the time the dancing motion of the fire registered in his peripheral vision, small flames had become large ones, hungry for more fuel and sending searing feelers up the windshield. He stared in disbelief for a second, then, in a panic, single motion grabbed his backpack, flung open the door, and fled, his discarded apple rolling down the dirt trail in his wake. Assisted by the breeze and the open windows, the engine fired swiftly and greedily spread to the cab, gradually petering out and dying after a brief but savage feeding frenzy. When smoke ceased belching from the engine, Alex cautiously approached and surveyed the ruins. His truck was a useless, smoking lump of metal, the ignition melted and the engine fry. Burned scraps of his jacket littered the blackened passenger's seat like confetti, and his phone, his lifeline, lay shattered and warped on the dashboard next to the now defunct GPS system. He took stock of his situation. He had no transportation, no phone, and no real idea of where he was. Jenna was in Ohio visiting her family for the first time since the couple moved to Tucson, and she wasn't expecting to hear from him until Monday afternoon. He wasn't due back to work until Tuesday morning, and in any case, he hadn't told any co-workers about his excursion. The odds of encountering someone else traveling the rough, overgrown road any time soon seemed infinitesimally remote. Stay with your vehicle. He'd read that somewhere, and so he stayed for a while, but the charred interior offered little shelter, no resources, and no hope of rescue. Mentally replaying the miles of dry, uninhabited nothingness covered to reach his current location, he realized that retracing that path was an impossible task. Heading northeast across the desert as the crow flies, however, he'd eventually intersect with the highway. A long hike, but better than the alternatives. With a resigned sigh, he pried his dead lump of a phone off the dashboard with a stick, adding its still warm carcass to the backpack on the off chance it might magically return to life. He then strode off with a granola bar, 3/4 of a liter of water, and the expectation that he'd be home before evening. As he strode through the morning and early afternoon, he reflected that his faithful gym attendance and regular morning runs were paying off. He was in good enough shape to handle a long hike. Even so, he found it uncomfortably warm, the temperature having risen to the mid-90s, causing his throat to prickle with thirst and the level of water in his bottle to diminish, as though it had sprung a leak. A pair of rugged ravines and a thick patch of prickly pear cactus forced detours, and with the sun directly overhead, it became more difficult to tell what direction he was headed. By late afternoon, he'd walked through miles of desert with no hint of human presence. The breeze blew effortlessly across the landscape, unimpeded by any man-made obstacles. When at last the sun dipped low on the horizon behind him, and there was no sign of the highway, he felt his heart pound and his chest heave as he tried to squelch feelings of panic. As darkness finally fell, so did tears of frustration and disbelief. Sticky all over with dried sweat, stabbed by hunger pangs, his fair skin burned sunset red. He shouted futilely for help, but received not even an echo in return. The quarter moon rose, going about its business as it had for millennia. Alex soldiered on in the dim light for a time on that first night, his heart jumping into his dry throat When the dark shapes of roosting birds exploded out of a bush he floundered into, their shrill alarm calls ringing in his ears for minutes afterward. The light breeze rustled clumps of dried grass, making a whispering sound like a conversation just out of earshot, and his footsteps sounded freakishly loud on the hard, gravelly ground. He could swear that when he stopped, the sound continued for a split second, as if someone were following behind him in lockstep, mimicking his every move, stopping just after he stopped. Glancing nervously behind him, he stumbled on the uneven ground and pitched forward, sandblasting the underside of his right forearm as he landed. Defeated by the darkness, he sought a resting place for the night. A rock outcropping near a large creosote bush beckoned, and he settled there, his back against the rock wall. How could a short day trip have become a night spent alone in the desert? He shook his head, incredulous. Nearby, the skeleton of a long-dead saguaro glowed yellow-white in the pale moonlight, casting a faint, ominous shadow. Beyond it, the landscape was amorphous and obscure in the darkness, its nocturnal occupants moving unseen and mysterious about their affairs as they did every night, always. To soothe himself, he conjured up fond memories of family camping trips in the woods when he was a child, and thoughts of sleeping bags and s'mores settled his nerves for a short time. Then, veering off track like a derailing train, his mind abruptly fixed on the ghost stories they told around the campfire. Frowning and cursing himself, he silenced the memories as best he could. He was jumpy enough without thinking about spirits and boogeymen. Famished and exhausted, he ate half of his granola bar, then tried to sleep. Sleep did not come easily. The arid, hard desert ground cannot retain heat, and as soon as the sun sets, releases its warmth to the night. Though it had been uncomfortably warm during the day, the temperature plummeted to the lower 50s at night. Wearing just a t-shirt and jeans and hugging his backpack for warmth, Alex shivered himself awake each time he managed to drift off and twitched nervously at each unfamiliar night sound. Surfacing into consciousness for the umpteenth time, he gasped in momentary terror as a pale, ghostly figure glided silently above the desert floor some yards away, his tired brain unable to interpret the shape for a moment. Owl, he realized finally. The snuffling pig-like sounds that came later were impossible for him to place and kept him still and frozen, pressed against a rapidly cooling rock wall for what seemed like hours before he at last drifted back into a fitful, fearful sleep. He awoke on Saturday morning with the first light of dawn. His fleeting hope that the whole excursion had been just a bad dream dashed as soon as he opened his eyes. His water supply rapidly diminishing, he devised a new strategy. He would travel during the cooler part of the day and rest in the afternoon, but surely he would find the highway before noon. Yesterday was discouraging, but the new morning gave him a burst of optimism. The day was a blur of walking and resting, the beauty of the landscape and the clear cerulean sky long since lost on him. Evening found him painfully thirsty and hungry after another hot day, and eventually forced to numbly accept that he would be spending a second night in the desert. The bottom of a small, rocky hill near a shallow ravine became his resting place for Saturday night. The knobby water bottle rattled hollowly against the melted phone as he dropped his backpack and settled in with his back to the stony hillside. Now desperate for water, his thoughts were becoming disordered and unfocused, and his eyes and skin were sandpaper dry. He gingerly prodded the abrasions on his right arm, stayed and screaming for attention all day, red, angry, and starting to swell. As darkness encroached once more, he used his small pocket knife to pick cactus spines out of his jeans and hiking boots, his mind wandering in a near dreamlike state. His blurred sight turned creeping shadows into dreadful stalking beasts with shaggy manes and long legs skulking behind the stunted desert plants, circling him on the fringes of his vision. The high-pitched yammering of a pack of coyotes reached him from a far distance. If they came closer, would they pass up an easy target? As his eyes began to feel heavier with the onset of sleep, a sudden, loud shriek pierced the air close by, sending tingles of alarm through his body. Holding his breath, he sat perfectly still in the dark, waiting. The same shriek sounded twice more. Farther away, a night bird of some kind, he hoped, jumping at every sound and shaking from the cold once again. Alex at last drifted into an uneasy sleep and dreamed an uneasy dream. He was at work late in the evening, long after everyone else had left. Parched with thirst, he left his office to walk to the break room for a drink. The building was still and silent, and all the offices, but as dark as tombs, their identical doors shut tight, their contents cryptic. He squinted to find his way, the hallway lighted only by tiny, dim, far-flung night lights with long stretches of pitch black in between. Twisting and turning, it wended its way for what seemed like miles with no end in sight, and he took to walking hastily through the dark stretches, more fearful with each moment that one of the doors would open of its own accord as he passed, revealing a horror behind it. When he looked back, there was no sign of his office now, just a tunnel of thick, sooty blackness. Gradually he became aware of the faint sound of sobbing coming from each office he passed, accompanied by muffled whispering from the far reaches of the hallway behind him, the words incomprehensible. He quickened his pace to a jog, eager to reach the safe haven of the break room. For miles and miles he jogged, the sobbing and whispering now gone, hearing only his own wheezing, gasping breaths. Finally winded and with his lungs aching, he was forced to stop, but only for a moment. Louder, but still inarticulate, the whispering began, the sobbing soon following. Closer now they issued from all of the offices at once. As terror began to overcome him, he broke into a run, despite exhaustion, like wounded prey in a final life-or-death effort to evade a predator. Rounding a bend in the hallway, he spotted a bright light in the distance, and though struggling for breath, managed a burst of speed toward it, revealing it to be the break room at last, awash in bright light and lined with dozens of vending machines containing bottled water and cold soda of every sort imaginable. It was directly across a wide hallway that formed the T-intersection with the one down which he fled. Some primitive instinct stopped his headlong rush just in time. He skidded to a halt at the edge of the hallway a dozen feet across from the break room and looked down. There was no floor, a drop into an obsidian black, apparently bottomless chasm between him and salvation. As he stood there panting and helpless, the now ceaseless sobbing escalated to a wail of agony, and he heard the office doors for miles down the hallway begin to rattle violently in their frames. He awoke with a start in the early dawn of his third day in the desert. Sunday proved to be as fruitless as its predecessors and walking ever more taxing. After failing to cut into the barrel cactus in the early evening, Alex trudged to a nearby dry wash to seek a place to spend the night. The wash stretched on endlessly in both directions, a broken promise of water. A high rocky cliff formed a wall. On the far side, some yards to the right, a handful of gnarled mesquites in front of it. Completely drained, he dropped where he stood, no longer caring to find a more suitable spot. As the sun began its descent and a chilly breeze sprang up, he fumbled his sketch pad and a pencil from the backpack and wrote a short, shaky note to Jenna, telling her that he loved her. Returning the pad and pencil to the backpack, he fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. In spite of the cold, his aching thirst, and the throbbing pain in his arm, his muddled mind couldn't process the sound that stirred his unconscious and woke him. Half awake, he waited for it to repeat, "Hola," after a minute. "Hola, amigo." A human voice came from the direction of the rock cliff on the far side of the wash. Snatching up his backpack, Alex struggled to his feet and staggered several yards to his right, closer to the source of the sound. His view of the cliff, dim at best in the moonlight, was further obscured by the clump of mesquites in front of it. "Aqui," the voice entreated. Climbing down the insignificant bank and crossing the wash revealed a shallow cave in the rock cliff only a few feet above the wash bed. A ridge of dirt and rock extended several feet in front of the cave entrance, making a natural walkway, and on that walkway stood a dim figure, by its voice a man, waving his arms above his head. Hallucination, dream, either was possible. Alex tentatively called, "Hello, hola," came the reply. Not completely trusting his eyes and ears, Alex closed the remaining distance to the rock cliff, scrambled stiffly onto the walkway, and approached the figure cautiously, fearing it would dissolve into nothingness, a figment of his imagination. As he grew closer, the moonlight brought to light a man of small stature and slight build, clothed in well-worn blue jeans, a light brown t-shirt, and a black windbreaker with neon green stripes starting at the neck and running the length of both arms. His dusty, scuffed boots had seen many miles of travel by foot. Jet black, wavy hair merged into the black of the cave interior behind him, and from what Alex could tell, his eyes were equally dark. An oval silver pendant hung around his neck, gleaming faintly as it caught the light. "Tin agua?" questioned the man with hope in his voice. Alex knew only a handful of Spanish words. Agua was water, the lack of which he felt keenly. "No," he replied, shaking his head, his swollen tongue making speaking an arduous task. "And coach?" the man asked next. Seeing the confusion on Alex's face, the man mime steering a car. "No, I did, but it doesn't run anymore," Alex responded, then realized the man probably couldn't understand him. "Do you speak English?" A flash of white teeth appearing in a slight smile, the man lifted his hand, holding his index finger and thumb close together. "Little," he responded. He then thrust his right arm out, inviting Alex to shake hands. "Me llamo Jose Luis," he offered. Alex shook hands, introducing himself, gesturing toward the interior of the cave. Jose Luis invited him inside out of the cool breeze. The cave was little more than a hollow scoop out of the cliff in some distant tierra, wide but not very deep, with a ceiling that sloped downward as it reached the back. When his eyes adjusted to the dark interior, Alex could just make out a battered backpack, a baseball cap, and two empty milk jugs lying on the left side about halfway back. Evidently the only possessions Jose Luis had carried with him across the border. The milk jugs, he guessed, formerly held water. Hardly daring to hope, Alex asked, "Do you know how to get to Tucson. Jose Luis nodded with a slight smile. Si, voy a Tucson para encontrar trabajo, he replied, pronouncing it Tucson. Whatever that meant, Alex didn't think it answered the question, and so tried again. Which way is Tucson from here? Alex pointed first one direction, then another, and gave an exaggerated shrug of his shoulders. Donde Tucson? Moving to the front of the cave, Jose Luis turned to the right and with no hesitation or sign of doubt pointed northeast. Relief flooded over Alex for the first time since Friday as he envisioned himself setting off at the first light of dawn with a guide. Finally sure of the way home to water and help and civilization. Interrupting this reverie, Jose Luis abruptly stood and beckoned Alex to the walkway in front of the cave. Alex followed, curious, as he stepped off the walkway and moved a short distance down the bank of the wash to the left. A rough square of fabric, perhaps a piece of a waterproof jacket or a light tarp, stretched on the sandy soil there, held in place by 7 or 8 rocks placed along its edges. The fabric sagged in a slope toward a small pile of pebbles in the middle, as if it were suspended over a hole in the ground. Grabbing Alex's sleeve and pulling him closer, Jose Luis pointed to the fabric and stated, in morning agua. The crude device must collect condensation during the cool night, yielding drinking water, Alex realized, nodding and smiling in understanding. There wouldn't be much, but even a thimbleful would be a blessed relief. A sudden loud rustling out of sight down the wash bed caused both men to flinch, then stand stock still, barely breathing. When the noise didn't recur after some moments, the pair relaxed, though Jose Luis glanced nervously around, as if trying to scan the opaque shadows in the desert beyond. Hey, phantasmas en el desierto, he whispered uneasily. Phantasmas. Alex repeated it in his head, his tired, fuzzy brain trying to work out an English equivalent. Phantasmas, fantasies, then phantasms, phantoms, ghosts. Jose Luis clutched the silver pendant he wore. Alex could make out a winged figure on it. An angel, San Miguel mi protege. He protect me, the man said, his voice now louder and more sure. Alex was past worrying about ghosts, but nodded his understanding. The two returned to the shelter of the cave, pressing both of his hands together and placing them alongside his face. Jose Luis shut his eyes and feigned sleep for a moment to communicate his intent to Alex. He then moved to the left wall of the cave and lay on his side with his back against it, his backpack serving as a pillow. Alex followed suit, his limited reserves of energy used up despite his renewed hope. Lying against the opposite wall of the cave, all he could see of Jose Luis was a vague, dark shape and the dim glow of the neon green stripe on his right sleeve. A muttered prayer in Spanish was the last thing he heard before drifting off into the soundest sleep he'd had in days. Free of dreams and filled with a cautious optimism, he awoke just before dawn, his memory of the previous evening returning in a flood. A glance across the darkness of the cave showed the dark outline of Jose Luis still sleeping in the spot he'd occupied earlier. Alex's first and most pressing thought, before he was even fully awake, was of water. He rose and stumbled to the location of the water pit just down the wash bank. The weak hint of daylight, not yet any brighter than the murky moonlight had been. A dozen steps should have brought him to the pit, but he was unable to spot the fabric that covered it even when he retraced his steps several times, deviating first to one side then the other, dropping to his hands and knees to better see the ground. He noticed a darker, oval patch just a few feet away and crawled to it, his injured arm aching. A shallow pit occupied the space, but no fabric covered it. The rocks that had held the fabric in place were disordered and scattered, a tattered strip of fabric under the remaining rocks along one edge. Carefully probing inside the pit with his hand, Alex discovered a small collection of dried desert plants, several pebbles, and a ragged piece of cloth, all half buried under dust and sand. As he attempted to pull the piece of cloth out of the dirt, it crumbled in his grasp, brittle and fragile. His heart pounded. Had he walked the wrong way down the wash bank? He was certain he hadn't. Had Jose Luis risen earlier, taken the water for himself, and destroyed the pit, then why would he have showed it to him in the first place? Distressed and bewildered, Alex sat cross-legged next to the pit until the first feeble rays of the morning sun showed themselves. He would confront Jose Luis and demand to know what happened to the water. He decided, using what limited strength he could muster, he returned to the cave, crossing the sand-strewn threshold, then approaching the still sleeping man. "Jose Luis," he called from the middle of the cave, but there was no response. Louder this time. "Jose Luis." Again the man didn't acknowledge him or even move. Alex took several steps forward and stooped over, stretching his right arm out to grab Jose Luis's shoulder and shake him awake, at the same time allowing a patch of the pure, newborn morning light to streak into the cave. His hand an inch from the green stripe on the black windbreaker, he froze. Jose Luis's left arm bent in front of his body, his hand resting on the ground in the spotlight of sun. Patches of brown, leathery flesh, withered and mummified, covered it, and the bones of several fingers showed through. In the dirt nearby was an old pendant with an image of St. Michael, long since broken away from its frail chain, on a dilapidated backpack. Hollow, empty eye sockets stared from a skull adorned with thick, black hair, long dead, years dead, and covered in dust. As Alex sat in the cave, staring into the distance, the sun ascended, and the desert inhabitants went about their business as they had for millennia. Story 3, Tales of the City, Part 4, The Last Stop. That reminds me of a story. What does? What she just said about being late to catch the train. Me, I didn't say anything. Well, I'm sure I heard someone mention it. And that reminds me of a story that scared the hell out of me. Do you remember that subway driver last month who went nuts? Remember it? I was on that train. Do you want to tell the story about it then? What else is there to tell? A lot. Plenty of rumors around dispatch about that one. Not that I believe any of them, mind you, but the way I heard it. It happened like this. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That voice was really starting to get to the driver. "We will depart shortly. Please wait." They'd been hearing that for 20 minutes now. The train was stalled to miles into the Transbay tube. It wouldn't budge an inch, but the driver's console showed that everything ought to be working. So it must be a problem with the tracks. She'd called it in, then assured her passengers everything was all right, and then waited. It wouldn't be so bad if the PA didn't seem to be on the fritz as well. Every few minutes a woman's disembodied, mechanical voice chimed, "We will depart shortly. Please wait." She couldn't turn it off. She didn't remember ever hearing that announcement before. But then she'd never had a breakdown like this before either. The train hummed on its electric rails, sealed up inside a steel tube submerged 130 feet below the surface of the bay. Her ears were stopped up from the pressure of the water above them. Up ahead, all the driver could see was darkness, the occasional lighting fixtures doing nothing except demonstrating precisely how pitch black it really was down here. She'd made this trip 6 times a night, every night, for 7 years, back and forth across 30 miles of track between SFO and Bay Point, which meant back and forth through the underwater tunnel 6 times, and never before had she stopped to consider the crushing weight of all that water. She thought she could hear bolts straining and water dripping somewhere. Just her imagination, of course, but still. We will depart shortly. Please wait. She toggled the PA switch again. It hadn't done anything the last 5 times, but she could help trying once more. She checked the security monitors. The passengers seemed calm enough, considering the circumstances. Her 4-car train held only 7 people as they came up on 1 o'clock in the morning. 2 were dozing and 1 was pacing the aisle. All but 1 had white earbuds snaking into the sides of their heads, and they would not now, and then to whatever they were hearing. She envied her rider's calm. If it just weren't so dark out there, she might not be so frazzled. The tunnel looked like it went on forever, and if they had stopped anywhere but under the water, and if that damn voice would just knock it off. We will depart shortly. No one can hear me but you. Please wait. The driver blinked. What was that? She toggled the switch again, but of course, nothing happened. Up ahead, one of the lights winked out, or was that her imagination again? She fanned herself with her clipboard. The stall train seemed hot and stuffy all of a sudden. The air conditioning was still on, according to her diagnostic panel. Perhaps it was just the confinement wearing on her. Would dispatch ever tell her what was going on? She thumbed the call button again. Any word on that track problem? She blurted it out, not even bothering to identify herself first. The only answer was static. She frowned and hung up. She began to sweat, and she pinched the ridge of her nose, eyes squeezed shut. A headache was coming on. We will depart shortly. Please wait, the automated voice whirred. Then, they're already inside. Look at the riders. The driver's eyes snapped open. What did it say? She looked up and did a double take. She grabbed a Windex-soaked rag and rubbed the monitor screens, but nothing changed. Something must be wrong with the cameras. Cars 3 and 4 looked fine, but in car 2 both of the sleeping passengers looked like indistinct gray blurs. In car 1, the same car she occupied, in the driver's carriage up front, the pacing man looked perfectly normal, but the woman in the back seat with the earbuds and also appeared blurry and distorted, as if a film of cobweb or a tiny fog bank covered her body. The driver looked over her shoulder, peering into the car through the plastic divider. The woman was still sitting there, staring at the blank tunnel wall outside her window, nodding her head to whatever was streaming through the wires in her ears. She looked perfectly fine. The driver chuckled a little at having scared herself, then rubbed her temples. The annoying recorded voice pinged again. We will depart shortly. No, we won't. We won't leave until what's keeping us here lets us go. You are not watching the riders. This time the driver was sure of what she'd heard. What the hell? She reached for the toggle. You can't turn me off. No one can hear me but you. A tingling sensation crept across the back of the driver's neck. Her hand froze halfway on the switch. Her fingers trembled. "Look at the riders again," the voice said. She hesitated. "Look." When the driver looked, she squinted and then leaned in, as if being closer would somehow change what was there. Two more of her passengers had lost definition on the video feed, leaving only to still showing up clear. The driver tapped the screens. What the hell? The sight of those blurry figures gave her chills. For some reason, their images seemed to wriggle and writhe, as if a cloud of tiny insects were crawling over them. The two sleeping passengers woke and, walking in unison, moved up to the first car. She expected to be able to see them clearly once they'd moved, but the grainy blur stuck to them as they moved. She looked over her shoulder again. Both of them were in her car now. One was a teenager, short and fat. The other an old man, gray and thin. They sat side by side in the front seats, though they'd been separate before. The pacer didn't seem to pay them any mind, but he did finally sit down. The driver watched as he fitted in white earbuds. "It's spreading. They're inside." "You have to get out of here," the train's voice buzzed at her. "Shut up," the driver mumbled. She looked at the monitors again. More passengers had moved up, for we're in the second car now. They all sat rigid in their seats, and they all faced forward. None of them spoke. She called dispatch again, but this time there was not even static, just dead air. Outside, the tube lights were turning out one by one, and the train's lights were flickering too. "Help won't come in time," said the train. The PA warbled it was losing power as well. "You have to run. They're in the wires." Now everyone was crowded into the lead car. All 7 riders sat side by side in the frontmost seats, staring at her. Their unblinking eyes looked flat and painted down in the flickering fluorescent lights. She tapped on the plastic divider. "Folks," she said, working hard to stop her voice from trembling, "they'll be here to help us any moment. If you could all just head back to your original seats, we shouldn't crowd the lead car in case of an emergency." No one answered. No one moved. The man nearest her removed his earbuds and looked at her. Her CCTV monitors were failing one by one. The faithful voice of the PA buzzed in her compartment, barely audible as the train's electrical systems slowly died. "They're turning everything off," it said. "They're sore. Tried to warn. They're in the wires. They used the wires, too." The 7 passengers all stood up. The driver went to open the door to her compartment, then thought better of it and locked it instead. Only the emergency lights were on now, and the passengers were dark blue silhouettes in the gray electric haze. "Folks, just return to your seats. Return to your seats and her mouth went dry. "Oh, late." The PA was overwhelmed by static, wired in, just voices. The static cleared for a moment. "The dead are just voices, but we can travel through the wires, into machines, even into bodies. Through the wires, through." 7 shapes crowded around the window. The driver tried to shrink back, but there was no room in the tiny compartment. "The 8 want new bodies. I told them not to do it, but they wouldn't listen. I tried to warn you. I try." The PA went dead. The consoles were all dark. Outside, the tunnel was a lone black passage to nothing. Inside, only one light was working. The driver heard fleshy palms slapping against the divider. Someone was pulling on the door. The flimsy lock jiggled. The divider broke in half and fell in, and then hands were grabbing her, pulling her. dragging her out. They were cold hands. She was screaming now, but with 2 miles of empty tunnel on either side and 130 feet of water overhead, there was no one to hear her. They held her down. "Let me go," she said. She felt cold all over. She felt something that made her think of the icy belly of a snake slithering across her body. One of the passengers leaned in. "It's okay," he said. Cold breath tickled the driver's ear. "It's okay," the passenger repeated. "We're not going to hurt you. We just want a ride. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. And then what? That's it. I mean, someone finally showed up to evacuate the passengers from the trap train, and when they did, they found that driver curled up in a corner, screaming that she wasn't herself anymore. Wasn't herself. Yeah, you know, that there was someone else living inside her head now. Oh, God, that's awful. I'm never riding at night again. Man, this whole city's going crazy. Is it just craziness, do you think? That's a good question. I mean, look how many strange stories we found right here in this bar. Maybe something terrible really is going on. Under the surface, like I said, it's all just rumors. Hey lady, you said you were on that train, right? Did my story? Wait a minute, where'd she go? Lady, ma'am, how? That's funny. She snuck out. Story 4. Something was in my kitchen last night. Someone was in my kitchen last night. I moved to this apartment about a year ago, and I swear that I haven't gotten a single good night's sleep since then. Every day, it's been the same. Get up, shove some cheap crap down my throat, go to school or work, come home, veg out in front of the computer, try to sleep. And I do mean try when I say try to sleep, because I have to try to block out the sound of scratching in the walls. Just this scratching. Faint, but just loud enough that I know I'm not imagining things. At least I don't think I am. I'll be lying in bed, bundled up in maybe 2 or 3 thick blankets if it's winter, and just about to fall asleep when it starts. It's always quiet at first, and I don't think I consciously register it at first, but I definitely notice it after a minute or 2. Scratching. Just this scratching in the walls, under the floor, sometimes in the ceiling. It always gets louder or closer. Every time I almost manage to shut it out. It used to keep me up for 2, 3 days at a time before I'd just pass out from sheer exhaustion. I'm taking sleep aids now, but I'm not sure that's a good idea anymore. I used to think it was rats in the walls, and of course I reported it to the landlord. As run down as the rest of the apartment is, with its water stains, ancient plumbing, and unreliable furnace, my landlord takes any kind of infestation very seriously. No one wants to get a reputation for having bed bugs and rats in their buildings. After all, I think it took him maybe 2, 3 days to get an exterminator and to take a look at the apartment. Not that it did any good. The exterminator spent maybe 2 or 3 hours scouring every nook and cranny, poking his nose into every dark space behind and beneath my furniture in search of even one scrap of evidence that some kind of pest was in there. Nothing. He didn't find so much as one whiff of a rat or a cockroach. Not one stray hair or telltale dropping. He must have thought I was a crazy, because I pushed him to look just one more time to stop just short of actually tearing open the walls. But he couldn't find a thing. So when I heard the scratching in the walls again that night, I tried to tell myself that it was all in my mind, that I could just will it to stop. It didn't, of course. I wouldn't be writing this if it had just been that easy. It just kept happening, keeping me up every night, and I'd lay there, exhausted but wide awake and hoping, praying, that it would just stop. I even started leaving traps and poison around the apartment, but nothing would ever be taken in the morning. I think that's about when things started getting worse, actually. I think I might have pissed them off by trying to kill them. It wasn't just scratching in the walls anymore. I'd hear things moving around outside my bedroom, like animals walking around, or things being moved around on the table or counters. I'd hear the quiet bump of something being put down, or the shuffle of something being pushed or dragged, but nothing would be out of place. It's like someone was rearranging my stuff at night, then deciding that they liked the way I had it better. I bought a camera to try to catch whatever was in the act. I wanted to buy more so that I could have one in every room, but I could only afford the one, since most of the movement seemed to be coming from my kitchen. That's where I set the camera. I set it in the corner where it'd see most of the room, turned it on, went to bed, and woke up to find that the camera had gone missing. Just the camera. The tripod was still there, completely undisturbed, but the camera was gone. When I was looking for it, I found a small, neat brown envelope tucked in my couch cushions that I sure as hell hadn't put there. My hands actually shook, and I could feel my heart pounding against my chest as I picked it up and turned it over. No address, no signature, not even a name. I don't know why I was expecting these things. Maybe I was just trying to find some strand of normalcy to cling to, some safety line to grab onto in the face of this insanity. I opened it, nearly tearing it into because my hands were shaking so badly, and I nearly pissed myself when I saw what was inside. The memory card. I didn't even bother packing my bags before I left. I just had to get the hell out of there, away from whoever had decided to pay me a visit in the night. All I grabbed was my wallet, my phone, and my laptop. The wallet so I could at least get a motel room for the night, and my laptop so I could see what the fuck was on the card. The second I was settled in this crappy, cheap little motel room with a bed that probably housed STD still unknown to the scientific community, I popped in the card. There was a single file on it, spanning from midnight to 4 a.m. That's when they took the camera, or at least that's when they came in and turned it off. Most of the video was just dead air. Nothing was moving. Nothing was being moved. I couldn't see anything that could explain why I had heard things moving around all night. Not a person, or an animal, or objects moving by themselves. I couldn't believe it. Not one thing was out of place the entire night. Nothing fell, nothing slid around, nothing. I skipped to about 10 minutes before the end of the video, hoping to God that I'd get something to prove that I wasn't going insane, but dreading the possibility of actually seeing whoever or whatever was responsible for tormenting me. The kitchen was completely dark except for the night light I'd plugged in to keep myself from running into things on my way to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Well, that was the idea. Anyway, you can guess how often I willingly got up to use the washroom in the middle of the night once everything started happening. The light cast this kind of greenish glow on everything, more giving shapes to the shadows, instead of really lighting up the room. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, but it was so close to the end of the video that I didn't want to fast forward in case I missed something. 9 minutes. Still nothing, but I swear I saw the light dim ever so slightly. 8 minutes. did a shadow just move? No, I decided. Probably. It looked too similar to how it was before. 7 minutes. Was that a thump in the background or just a digital artifact from the mediocre microphone? 6 minutes? Did the camera just shift a little? 5 minutes, the camera is trying to focus on something. There's nothing there, but it's trying to focus on something. 4 minutes, the ambient noise has just cut out. The video is completely silent, but checking the audio information shows that the camera was recording every sound in its range the entire time. 3 minutes, the ambient sounds are back, but I swear they're louder. 2 minutes, I definitely heard something moving out of frame. It's quiet, like it doesn't want to be heard, and it sounds very close to the camera. I think it's behind it. 1 minute, the night light goes off. It takes a camera a second to adjust to the complete darkness, and everything is still much darker in comparison to the rest of the video when it does. 30 seconds. The camera shifts just a little, like something bumped the tripod. 20 seconds. I think I can hear something. Breathing. 10. The breathing is replaced by static. I want to call it static, but it's more like these distorted, animalistic noises mashed together and forced through some digital filter. Fuck. 5. Something moves out of the shadows. It looks like a person, but the way it moves it like it's a part of the wall detaching itself and gliding toward the camera. It just stands there, staring straight into the lens for a few seconds. I say staring, but only in the sense that it's facing the camera. I can't see any details. No clothes. No distinction between its limbs and its body. No face. It's like it's just this shadow existing where it shouldn't be able to. Standing there like it has some solid existence. Like it's not some violation of physics. 1 second. The entire frame just goes dark. I go back to examine it more closely, and I realize that this thing had actually covered the lens with its hand because I can see a couple of small slivers of the background between its fingers. I can't go back. This fucking thing is still there, and it's fast. I check the video, and there was no transition between it standing and it covering the lens. 1 frame it's standing and staring, and the next it's right up in the camera. I looked through the rest of the video, and this goddamn thing was standing in the shadows the whole time, just standing there perfectly still. I was still technically in the room for the first few seconds because I had to walk from the camera to my bedroom after turning it on. I was in the room with this thing, and I never saw it. I've been watching the shadows in my motel room for a few hours now, and I don't think it's followed me. But how can I be sure? Can I even see this thing with my own eyes? I don't know what to think anymore. I think I can hear someone pacing in front of the door, but that might just be a cleaning lady or another guest. I just wish they'd leave already. It's been an hour, and they haven't stopped pacing.